Reading reorder paragraphs guided practice. Let's begin. Here's question number 1. You have to arrange these paragraphs in the right order. Let's look at the solution. So at the top, you are seeing the paragraphs as they were in the originally given to you, and below in green are the paragraphs in the correct order. Now, how do you go about the reorder paragraph questions? You quickly skim through. So you look at this text, they usually in the good old days, universities, probably nothing has changed in higher education, class sizes. Okay, so you get an idea that this is about higher education, the kind of people who are going into higher education earlier compared to now, and their financial backgrounds, etc. Initially, when you're looking at these paragraphs, you can immediately tell that some of these they usually. So what does they refer to? That means it can't be first in the good olden days. Which good olden days? Again, this can't be. So at the same time, when you are skimming, you can get some idea of some paragraphs which are not in the right order. So then later on, you can focus on the other ones. And after you've done that, the first thing that you have to do, you have to find one paragraph or one sentence. That is the lead. That is the first one. So it can stand on its own. By that we mean it should not require any other information to complete the meaning. And when you look at all of these, you'll find probably nothing has changed more in higher education over the last 50 years than the students themselves. This seems like the best one because first, it's almost independent, and then it also introduces the theme of the topic. When we went through the paragraphs, this is about higher education, the changes, and the students that are coming into higher education. So this paragraph neatly sums up that. So nothing has changed over the last 50 years. So which paragraph will come after this? That you have to find the next. So look at a paragraph which can use some of the information given here. So they usually come from wealthy or at least financially secure backgrounds. Yeah, that can go here because they can link up with students. But let's look at the other paragraphs as well. So the next one, in the good old days. The good old days refers to the earlier period, the last 50 years. So out of these, you have to pick one. And I'll go with the second one because there are other sentences which also refer to students. So they can come after that. But the good old days has to go after this because there's no other paragraph which is referring to that time period. So that's why I pick the second paragraph as in the good old days. The third one, then we pick the third, they usually come from. That nothing has changed. Less than a third of students from high schools went on to higher education. Most came from families who themselves, and they usually come from wealthy. They refers to these students who come from wealthy families. Okay. The next paragraph, again, it builds upon this information previously that who are the students who are going into the universities. You are basically left with two paragraphs after this, the class sizes and the universities. If you write class sizes and then you suddenly write about universities, then it sort of breaks the flow. Usually when you are writing a paragraph, you first complete a point. So the discussion had started about higher education and students. And these three paragraphs, they talk about the students. And then this is a clean paragraph which talks about the other changes in higher education, such as class sizes and faculty. So that's why we keep these close. We place universities before class sizes. All right. So when you are arranging these paragraphs, first try to find the opening paragraph. Sometimes, as I said, you can have a couple of candidates for a position. As we were saying, we can use they and we can also use this. They could both have made sense. And then what you have to do, you have to think about the order of how that would impact the order of other paragraphs. So if I put this sentence, they usually come in the second place, then where will I put in the good old days? So that's why we put this here. And this also has a mention of students, and therefore it can come before they usually came. And this was another point which talks about students. And finally, there's one sort of point which is different. It still covers fits under the overall theme of changes in higher education. But the first three, they are about the changes related to students. And the other is about other things such as pressure to do research and the changes in faculty and class sizes. Okay, so do that. And in the end, once you have done, you should read from top to bottom because often you'll find when you are reviewing that maybe I should move this paragraph below or this paragraph above. So give yourself a few seconds to do that analysis in the end. Let's go to the next question. Here's the answer. So again, we'll quickly look at the paragraphs. One of the three elements for language comprehension is this: to comprehend the sentence, etc. We need to learn that bugs, as mentioned above, background knowledge, young readers, as an example. So now if you see, first we need to, this text, it's about language comprehension and the role of background knowledge in it. Now, the first thing we have to do, we have to find an opening sentence. Now, let's look at the second one first. To comprehend this sentence. Which sentence? We don't have that information, so this can't be the first one. As mentioned above, it already is referring to something above, so it's not the opening sentence. Young readers learn to strategically apply their background knowledge in order to interpret a text meaning. So this can be an independent sentence. As an example, as a small example of what? So this paragraph can be. Now the choice is between the first and the young readers. Yeah, but when you look at it, the first option, it is much broader it introduces language comprehension and then points towards background knowledge. And young readers, it's more specific to background knowledge. So that's why, and we always go from broad to more specific in writing. So that's why we pick one of the three elements necessary for language comprehension is background knowledge. And then the next one, as mentioned above, background knowledge is this. So this sentence, it already tells us that one of the elements is background knowledge. And then this sentence gives us a bigger definition of what background knowledge is. And after that, there is a mention of how young readers, they learn to apply their background knowledge in order to interpret a text meaning. And the last two sentences, they give an explanation of this. So as a small example, the small example means how to apply background knowledge to interpret a text meaning. Example of that. They've given this sentence. The last sentence, you see, they're referring to bugs in double quotes. To comprehend this sentence, so first of all, which sentence? This particular paragraph, it has a sentence in double quotes. So this sentence refers to this sentence, initially Richard 2 was completed. So that determines their order. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that you get points for pairs. So if you just arrange these two, you'll get a point for that. And if you just arrange these two, you'll get a point for that. Then this is a pair, so you get a point for that. And usually when you arrange them in pairs, it makes it simpler. So for example, if you arrange these two in pair and these two in pair, then it becomes much simpler and if it's only 4 sentences or paragraphs, then you just have to decide which pair will come after the other pair. So follow that rule. First find the lead paragraph, find the next, and then you will complete one pair. And then try to find the next paragraph on, but always look for the relationship between pairs. And as I said earlier, there can be different kinds of relationships. So often a pronoun referring to a noun, something specific referring to coming after a broad introduction of a topic, as language comprehension comes first. And then a sentence about a more specific definition of background knowledge comes after that. And once you have introduced a concept, an example obviously will follow that. You can't give an example before you have given a definition. The next question. Here's the solution. Again, start with first quickly skimming through on the aggregate level. Children physically respond, are able to maths and SPs that account competence. As early studies show that even very young children are quite sophisticated listeners. So we need to find the opening sentence here. And is this studies show that even very young children are quite sophisticated listeners. It's an independent assertion, a statement. Nothing more is needed. When you read it, you can understand what the text is about. And then it refers to very young children. So the next paragraph expands on that, as early as 2 years. That is very young children. Metz and his peers assert that a common competence found is the enacting through movement, because initially we have mentioned that some studies or some research shows, and then Metz and his peers, that's an example of those studies. And finally, on the aggregate level, children physically respond to a music's beat, which sort of refers to what's mentioned here in the previous paragraph. Enacting through movements of the music's most constant and salient features such as the meter, tempo, etc. that's the music's beat, and are able to move more accurately when the tempo corresponds to the natural tempo of the child. So this is a theory, and this is an explanation of that, and those are the relationships that you have between these paragraphs. Many people, they find reorder paragraphs to be one of the most challenging questions in the reading section, and it can be, but you need to use, there are a few different things you need to use at the same time to answer these. First of all, you need to have some understanding of basic grammar concepts like noun, pronoun. So if there's a pronoun, there should be a noun before that. That way you can find a link. And then some basic rules. You have to always try to find a common thread. What is leading me from one paragraph to another? So as I also mentioned earlier, there can be a paragraph which is a definition, and what comes after that is an explanation. What comes after that explanation can be an example. Or it can be, the first can be a cause, and what follows the cause, it can be an effect. So all of those, and sometimes you start with a broad, the introduction is broad in nature. For example, somebody might talk about the last 3,000 years. And then the next paragraph talks about the most recent 500 years. And the paragraph after that talks about the last 10 years. So you go from broad to more specific. So there's always some relationship in the text, and you should always ask yourself those questions. Okay. What is linking, for example, this paragraph to this? What is linking this to this? Which paragraph has information that this paragraph needs? So when you ask yourself these kind of questions, you will be more easily able to find the relationships and arrange the paragraphs. The other thing you have to do, and I also mentioned this when we were studying the multiple choice questions, make it a habit to read some kind of an academic text every day. And when you're reading a report, see how it follows from one paragraph to another, how they maintain the flow, how they maintain the relationship. That will help you to quickly identify those patterns when you see that in exam as well. The next question now. And here's the solution. So again, first read. So it talks about Canada, some Canadian history, etc., etc. You have to find the first paragraph after that. If you look at the paragraphs that are given to you, others point out. So who are these others doing so? Doing what? It's one thing to know about some of the key events in Canada's history. It's another to know a thing or two about how our history came to be written. Now that seems like good. The next part of the challenge is defining which challenge. A response to that claim is that. So what claim? So clearly in this case, only the sentence beginning with it's one thing is in the opening paragraph. Then look for a paragraph which can follow this. When you see part of the challenge is defining, so look for a paragraph it says that it's one thing to know about some key events. It's another thing to know about how our history came to be written. It means it's challenging to know about how our history came to be written. So that's the reference that part of the challenge makes. So that's how we go to that. As it is often said, what it is said, that Canada is a young country without much history. So that's a claim that's made. And the third paragraph, a response to that claim. So it follows. So you see, there are all these logical relationships between the paragraphs. And as I discussed earlier, when you complete at the end, spend 10-20 seconds to quickly go through and see if there's any reason why you should swap the orders or move a paragraph to another place. Otherwise, you can submit and go to the next question.